Holy smokes! What a start! What a violent beginning!
What are you wearing?
What opening! What terror!
You look great. What are you wearing?
What am I wearing? I'm wearing.
Yes.
I'm wearing a Dickies thing.
Even better. You've got the full thing on. Fantastic.
Yeah, I do. Well, it's been like I've been exploring loungewear since the whole thing started, and I thought this is definitely one of the things I wanted to try. And I also
You're right. I'm just gonna caveat this. You said I explore loungewear since the whole thing started. You've been exploring loungewear for the last 20 years.
Tell him, Dingman. Tell him about himself.
All right.
You make it the last 2 months. You've been doing that for years.
All right, fair. And I do have to say that that I also bought some overalls, some train conductor overalls.
Oh, yeah. They're really comfortable.
Exactly, and this is super soft and comfortable. I'm very surprised. Dickies. It's not tough like I thought it would be. You know, when you buy Dickies pants, you're just
yeah. I have a pair of Dickies 874s. They're scratchy. They're
terrible. This
it's
is
like
not
the Greeks and their wool tunics. I don't understand it.
No,
I thought it was.
Who said it? Was it the Family Guy that's like, it's wearing shredded glass?
Kind of.
Well.
Yeah. So you guys, well, first of all, let's welcome everybody else because we're already super chatty Cathy here. Yeah. But welcome everybody to the History Happy Hour, episode 3. We're all kind of pumped on this one. As always, I'm Alf Lamont. Cheers, everyone.
What are you drinking today?
Whoa! What was that?
Oh, that was so clear.
Oh
man, big time.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, we're in Eastern Europe today, so I thought represent. And
Agreed.
Please, who is this vampiric vixen we have above us?
Oh, hello. I'm Amanda Brass, and today I'm drinking pure water, filtered water.
Not blood.
No, well, it's the blood of the earth. But I'll just be keeping hydrated today. Down.
All right, fair. Dan, what's up? What are you up to?
I'm doing this. I can't even say it. Can anybody look?
Prokupak?
Yep.
There we go.
I don't think it's Romanian, but
it's close enough, man. It's got that creepy U and C combo, right?
Yeah.
K-U-P-A-C it.
I have no idea.
It totally.
I'm halfway through it, by the way.
It's it works as Romanian for me anyway. Like I feel like if you had claimed it was Romanian, then I would have agreed. Oh, and you're
Sarah insisted I had to have this with it.
Water. Oh, sure. Keep hydrated. Don't let Sure. I think that's important. So today we have a really I think it's a really loaded subject, which is Vlad the Impaler. But I wanted to because Dan and Amanda and I, we've all been kind of discussing, do we go in chronological order? Do we jump around? And I think Vlad is kind of a fun way to continue chronological order without just kind of diving headfirst into the Renaissance. If you guys remember last week, we did the Black Death, which kind of dropped us off at the front door of the Renaissance. And if we kind of had gone chronologically, we would be diving headfirst into, the Borgias and Florence and all of this stuff. And as much fun as that is, I just kind of felt like we needed to go for something that was a good palate cleanser between the Renaissance and the Black Death. And so I don't know how much of a palate cleanser it is, but I feel like Wallachia and Moldavia and Transylvania, and basically like what is now Romania, but that whole area, one of the things Is it me? Is it who cares? One of the cool things about that area is that what Amanda and I were talking about, and what we had been texting back and forth today, is that the light of the Renaissance did not shine entirely through the Carpathian mountains and the forests of Transylvania, right? That as Europe recovered from the bubonic plague and from the Black Death, the East didn't get all of that, like, hey, let's paint naked ladies and oh, let's have a revival of all this stuff. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And I kind of wanted to touch base on all of that. So I'm super excited about this, because we're not just gonna go like ooh, vampire Vlad. We're kind of gonna dive into just what makes this area so creepy. And why does that creepiness kind of catch our interest? So, and you guys, I mean, I feel like you guys are also excited about this, right? Like,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Brass, why don't you tell us a little bit about your about your attachment to this subject matter? Because I feel like we all have like a little bit of an emotional attachment.
This is an embarrassing anecdote, but I'll share it. I was in my friend's basement watching Salem's Lot by myself when I was 5 years old. I do not recommend Salem's Lot for anybody at 5, but it haunted the visuals of that movie haunted me so badly that I went to kindergarten and just drew everything with vampire teeth and blood coming off of it.
Oh, wow.
Everything I drew in art class, everything I drew, the teachers had to call my parents. We had to have a meeting. Why is she no, well, we'll tell her not to draw vampires. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Whitehead. She won't do it again. I continued to care about vampires all my life. And it's because I was told on one hand, in my Christian ideology, there's no such thing. But in my real world, in living in an American culture, middle white class, I was surrounded with the voluptuousness and the sensuality of vampires.
Right. Hence your avatar this time around, right?
So you're telling me there's no such thing, but then you're making an entire movie, an entire season of television about why do we deny ourselves the pleasure of knowing vampires if they don't really exist? So that seesaw of love and hate between vampires started at kindergarten.
Wow.
And then grew into more of a scientific interest. I started to care more about cannibalism, oddly enough, right around the time Silence of the Lambs came around. So Silence of the Lambs got me thinking about how is it can we be
Dan's brain just exploded. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You can't. I started to be more interested in cannibalism because of ...
Well, I thought vampires were cannibals.
I mean, in a real way, yeah.
Well, they are. Yes, they are.
And the vampire legend and this idea that we ingest the essence of others and virgins and sex, all of those things have real roots, not just in history, right, but in our psyche.
Yeah.
We when we ingest the energy of a creature, we feel stronger, right? And so it would make sense to our ancestors that's a thing. And
it's the holy exchange.
Right, exactly.
The blood of
And
Christ
transubstantiation and Christianity, all of those things, like cannibalism is something that fascinates us, right? And I think that is, you're correct in adding that to vampirism. Now, that from jumping like you being in kindergarten and suddenly you're interested in cannibalism, I think the wording was a little bit shocking. But yeah, no, you're spot on. And I would say, cannibalism as a Mexican in Mexican culture has a real like resonance, right? Because we can basically say that like we tread the ground of cannibals. The Aztecs were known as the Cannibal Empire.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So your fascination is not unique. It just came as a shock during this conversation.
Oh well.
I wouldn't even say
scientific-
shock. It was
what
fantastically
happens to our bodies when we
hilarious.
eat other people? It's not good. We get a bad reaction, and
Right.
yet people persist on eating people.
Fucking sexy.
What? I mean,
It is, right? I mean, it's super sexual, right? And we'll explore some of those mythologies.
yeah.
But then inevitably you're interested in vampirism and consumption kind of led to the Dracula myth, right?
Yeah, and then was exposed to, hey, we can actually study this psychologically. We can study this scientifically. We can look at blood under a microscope and understand what's happened. I was very much interested in that from that point on. Less about the mythos of why do I want to be bitten by a very handsome Dracula to, oh, why do people still talk about this? Why does this persist in culture? It's
Sure.
something we don't want to leave behind. And we have to thank this section of the Carpathian Mountains. We have to thank them for that. They've created an immortal.
And let's actually cut to right now real quick.
Yes, let's look at the Carpathian Mountains. I mean,
Yeah.
excuse me, sorry. They are really pretty. Those are nice mountains right there.
Okay, Dan, just before we jump into the beauty of the Carpathians, and you're already starting to slur, which is worrisome. No wonder you're drinking the water. But can you tell us a little bit about your attachment to like our subject matter?
Well, I've never been to Romania per se, but I do like Eastern Europe. I've been to the Czech Republic and Hungary, which is nice. And if you get the chance, go. That's all I have to say at this point.
Fair. Okay. So and for me, like I have to say that my introduction, like for me, it's all about connections, right? Like my ability to connect to understand something more completely. I have some pretty extreme attention deficit disorder, which for me it means that like I can't just look at a thing. I see a variety of things within a thing, and so context becomes super important.
Sure.
And so I start like I just kind of fall into some of these things, right? So I knew that the Ottomans had invaded Constantinople, right? That the Byzantine Empire had fallen, that it became Istanbul, that they kind of reached into Europe. I had those understandings, but then it didn't really click to me like how that was connected with the creepiness and the sort of otherness of Transylvania, Wallachia, Moldavia, Gothinia. It didn't really click until I saw what I put in our intro, which is the 1992, I think, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is an excellent film. If you ever get a chance to see it, it's a really good film. But what Francis Ford
good.
Yes, it is. And what Francis Ford Coppola did at the intro to that was he helped set a historic context, and for the first real time in one of these Dracula myths. And so what he did was he became the connector between the Bram Stoker story and the story of Vlad Tepes, or Vlad the Third, or whatever we're going to call him here, and really like made that connection. But what I'm pumped about is all of the awesome stuff I've learned in the last week or so of like trying to piece together like what the hell. And really like when you think about this area, like Transylvania barely exists in my mind as an actual place. Like Transylvania to me means Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, gypsies, like all of these things that aren't based in like an actual physical place, but are more based in fantasy. So I'm extremely excited to be diving into this. So I think let's just really quickly talk about this map, because this area, Transylvania, Moldavia, Wallachia, Gothsnia, Gothsnia, or Gothisnia. Sorry, Gothisnia. All of, sorry?
Gesundheit.
Oldie but a goodie. But all of these places, they are all in the most unfortunate, historically speaking, in the most unfortunate space, and that is they are in an area that has gold and salt.
The best.
Right?
Everybody wants a piece of that, though. Honestly.
Yeah, and they're in the Danube Valley, right? So they're close to the Danube, which means that from a historic standpoint, it's a yummy piece of land. And what we learned last week is that, like we had like a little conversation around Sicily, is that these yummy pieces of land that have these natural resources, and that they get fought over. And you add to that the fact that Romania and the Carpathians are sort of the gateway to Europe from Asia. If you've already crossed the Black Sea, and suddenly you find yourself in a place that's going to be all sorts of yummy for a lot of people, right? And I think what's interesting is that the natural resources and the geographic location of Transylvania and Wallachia and all of these places actually feeds into what created the Dracula myth, and what our perception is of this thing, and what made Vlad the Impaler. And by the way, in the names of rulers, is there anything more fearsome than Vlad the Impaler?
No, I defy anyone to find a scarier sounding moniker.
Right?
That actually existed in history, not a fake one, a real man. No, you cannot top that.
Which ones do we know? Like, there's Peter the Great, Alexander the Great, Alfred the Great. There's a lot of the greats, like
yes, but the Impaler.
The Impaler, right? And one of my favorites is the English king Ethelred the Unready.
That's basically whatever management job I've had, you might as well say that's what it is.
Dan the Unready. Your Majesty, yes. No, don't come in yet. And there's Ethelred the Unready, and there's I believe there was in Spain there was a Philip the Beautiful.
Oh wow!
Not the handsome, nice. Not the handsome.
I've never had that.
The Beautiful. Yes. So anyway, Vlad the Impaler, he was an impaler, and he was terrifying, and the story is terrifying because the history and the area and the space that he inhabited is terrifying. Yeah. And it's terrifying because of where it sits. And it sits in what one might consider darkness, right?
Correct.
And one of the things we talked about was, again, the light of the Renaissance and the light of in Kenneth Clark's voice, civilization.
Oh.
It takes longer to permeate to these tribes and these spaces in Romania that are just more difficult to get to, right? You've got the Carpathian Mountains, which present a physical barrier between the easy flowing civilization of Rome and of the Aegean and all of these great things that are happening, and you've got these wild woolly forests. And you've got these huge dark mountains that are providing like a barrier between it. But eventually, it has to happen, right? Eventually, like cultures have to collide.
Yep.
So,
it gets there.
Sorry?
It gets there.
It gets there, right? And so the Dacians were the original like civ of this area of Romania of empire. And what's interesting is like it's if you look at Dacian history, like like we Dan, we talked about this in episode 1, and we talk about how as theater majors, all three of us, we have this sort of desire for narrative, and there's not that much narrative around the Dacians, and I'm sure there's a historian who's going to go like, well, blah, blah, blah.
Well, they're welcome to do that because we don't know. Like,
and sure, it's thrilling if you dive deep enough, but let's just say that we've looked surface level and maybe one notch in, and are still trying to find interesting things about the Dacians, and it doesn't pop like other cultures, which then leads you to tell you that this isn't necessarily like a hugely advanced civilization. And I say that, of course, with the knowledge that I'm sure they had certain elements around them that made it, but they didn't record and pass it on in a way that was long and meaningful, and so their records are incomplete. And so most of the records that come to us about the Dacian Empire come to us from
Roman.
But they're fucking tough. Sorry, I didn't mean the F word.
It's
They're
okay.
tough, man.
They are.
On that eastern side, man.
Yes.
They were the wall.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, exactly. And we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Was out of control.
We'll get to that. But what happened was the you're right, Amanda. It is the Romans, right? So
yeah.
So it's important for us to acknowledge that most of Dacian history comes to us from Roman conquest. And what's interesting is Rome was interested in protecting the gold mines and protecting the salt mines and protecting the Danube. They were not interested in what was going on in Wallachia and in Transylvania, right? They were just like, okay, cool. And so I like to say that Trajan was the and badass Roman emperor, by the way. Trajan's among the cooler ones. But Trajan basically created a protectorate in Wallachia, in that area, and let them rule themselves. Like he was just like cool, very much like what's his name in Israel, King of the Jews. Come on, Herod, right?
Oh.
Herod was king of Judea, but under Roman protection. Well, Rome repeated that with the Dacian areas and Wallachia and Transylvania. They're like, oh, okay, you guys have your own thing going. You're conquered, but you just go ahead and rule yourselves, right? And so they'd have a garrison, and they'd standardize the money and all of that stuff, but really but they ruled themselves, which is something that the US does, right? Samoa, Puerto Rico, right? Like we still see that, and that model started in Rome. So we have the Roman conquest, and that lasts a long time. And in the middle of the Roman conquest comes Attila the Hun.
Woo! Now maybe he's got the second most scary name.
Right?
Under the Impaler.
Right, but that's the thing. I don't know that Attila the Hun would be a scary name if it wasn't for the fact that it was Attila the Hun, right? Like from a historical standpoint, I think
right. A Hun doesn't mean much to us outside of what Attila's
right.
Right.
And there is World War I and World War II, kind of like a derogatory term towards Germans was the Hun, right? But the truth is that what is the context for Huns and Attila the Hun, and why is it that we three know that that's an intense, important thing, but it doesn't, like, what do we know about it, right? And so basically the reason Attila the Hun is important to this story is because he was one, and the Huns were one of the first tribes to really give Rome a good thrashing, right? They gave good shellacking. And they did it in this area of the Carpathians, of Romania, of Wallachia, of Transylvania.
Oh,
right?
really?
Yes.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah. And so what happens is the Huns come in from the north. They just kind of sweep in, and the story is that Attila kind of wanted to be a player in the world stage, and in those days you weren't a player until you dealt with Rome directly. And he was already known as kind of a powerful warlord. And remember that word warlords, because I think this area, if we get into the mindset of warlords and people who just attack places and plunder and make their fortunes and their power through attacking people, that helps us kind of conceptualize like what this area is going to be like as we get into further. But Attila was a warlord, and he wanted to play with the big kids, and he was particularly good at war, right? And so he had been making a name for himself, and the sister of Emperor Valentinanius III. So you can already, so two things about that name, Valentinianus the third. Okay. Valentinianus. Okay, got it. So I think just knowing from the name Valentinianus, we know that that's a Christian name, right? Because we know that Valentine was an early Christian martyr. So we know that we're talking about now, we're past the Roman conquest of AD 85, 89. We're talking further into Roman times, and Attila the Hun. And basically Attila wanted to play in the world stage. The sister of the emperor wrote to him saying, "I don't want to marry this guy. Can you help me?" Right? Okay, so you are a wild man from the north, and you want to play in the big leagues, and you get a letter from the sister of the emperor, and she's like, "Help me out. I don't want to marry this guy." What is implied?
That I would rather you come get me and take me out of here.
Right. And I think right. that the implication there, and to any of us who have had a romantic aspirations cut at the knee, sometimes if you want something to be true, especially in love and life, and you'll take something that you'll misread something, right?
It's like a text message.
Yeah. And so he gets this text, he gets this 2 a.m. text from the emperor's sister saying, "You up?"
Yeah.
And she's literally asking, "Are you awake?" And he's going like, "That's a booty call."
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. And
so he's just like, "Hey, what's up? You need my help? I'm here for you, baby." Oh, and the emperor's just like, step back, boy. Just like get away from him. So when these things happen between us, it's like embarrassment, and we kick the ground, and we're just like, "Oh, totally misread that situation. I'm going to go hide for a few days, or I'm never talking to those people again."
No.
But in this time, and we're dealing with the leaders of these tribes and of Rome, it becomes a reason to go on a rampage. Yeah. So Attila goes on the war path, and I think and there's a lot to be said about, like, if we're getting the story of Attila from the Roman point of view, then he's a horrible, horrifying savage, right? And he was known by the Romans of Flagellum Dei, or the scourge of God, right?
Woo!
Yeah, right. Talk about the Impaler. The scourge of God was this guy's nickname, and there were a few things that he really leaned into the whole, like, we're sacking Rome and we're freaking them out. And psychological games play a big role in warfare, in ancient times and in medieval times, and even to this day, right? Like we tell ourselves, like, I remember when so damn insane Saddam Hussein would light pits on fire and would gas his own people, you know, and we say these things because they're terrifying, and we want to paint these folks as like subhuman and capable of anything.
Yeah.
But to a very real extent, these folks also want to paint themselves as that, so that it's easier to go into a place and take it over, right?
Right.
So Attila the Hun walks in, and the Huns were known as, you ready for this? Screamers, right? So they would scream in a horrible way as they rode into battle. And so you can imagine, you're not prepared, you're Rome, you're used to being chill. It's like the US, right? Like we're like, if somebody invaded the US, if somebody came into the US right now and invaded the port of Long Beach or the port of Los Angeles or San Francisco, sacked San Francisco and then left, and we couldn't track them, and they did so in a particularly bloody and effective way, like, we'd be terrified of them. We'd be like, what just happened? Right? We'd be like, and they screamed. And in addition to that, his soldiers were known to tie the severed heads of vanquished fighters to the saddles as they charged, shrieking into battle.
Yeah.
So you're talking, right? You're talking
it's
about
effective.
It is effective. It is effective, and it's bloody, and it's violent, and it's awful. And Attila did that which will be repeated often in this space, and that is, they took out complete cities. They took out populations, right? They showed no mercy, and they pillaged, and there was, I mean, Attila was all about the bling, right? Like, Attila wanted the money. But what happens is, like, he comes in and he sets the stage for some severe violence in this area of Romania, Carpathia, and so on, right? So what we have then is, this is Roman times still, and we have this space already being going back and forth as opposed to being fought over in a super violent way. The Romans came in and they did the Roman thing, which tends to be a little bit less. It's violent and horrible, but it's a conquer with like the idea to subjugate and rule. I don't think Attila had that.
No.
I don't think Attila was interested in holding large swaths of land in the same way that the Romans were. I think Attila's, and I'm sure there's Attila scholars out there that are going to be just like, actually, tell us all about it. But my guess here is that the Attila's motivation was a little bit more from the gut, and it was a little bit more financial, and it was a little bit more immediate, which made him scary to the Romans, who saw themselves as the apex of civilization. And another important thing to talk about is that we're talking about Eastern and Western Empire times as well. So Rome is kind of split between Constantinople, which is seen as the beacon of hope and light and enlightenment, when Rome falls, and the attacks of Attila on this area are also directly responsible for distracting Rome and having the Western Empire fall, right? So during this time, the Western Empire is also being attacked from various places, and so Eastern Empire is under attack by Attila. Western Empire is under attack by a variety of people, and so the idea of this incredible savage group attacking this area becomes ingrained in the cultural psyche of these folks. And so important to note that even during Roman times, and yes, late Roman times, but nonetheless Roman times, brutality and savagery of severed heads on horseback are already starting to come into what is still a pretty dark area that is ruled by mountains and dark forests. In fact, I want to point out right now that the name Transylvania, it means through the forest, or on the opposite side of the forest. Transylvania, right?
Yeah.
And so you're thinking about all of these things, and you're talking about an area that's gonna get it, right? They're gonna, and I don't mean get it like, oh, I get it. No, they're gonna get it, right? Like they're gonna get it over.
Gatekeepers get crashed.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what we, and oh, and by the way, the Huns, the Huns were described by the Romans as incredibly ugly people. So you can imagine ugly people with severed heads and on their horses coming in and destroying everything. Like it's a mess, right? And so the Eastern Empire, the Western Empire, all of that is kind of falling apart, and the Roman Empire sort of flattens like a souffle that got taken out. It just kind of goes bleh. And what happens is during this period of time, everybody's trying to kind of stake out their own thing, but it's still the Dark Ages, man. There's no centralized power. There's nothing, right? And whereas in the rest of Europe, they have a chance. We talked about this in the last episode. We talked about how the area, the time between the 1000s and the 1300s was kind of a 300-year period of some stability. Now, if you think that if you're talking about the backwater of a Roman Empire that's already kind of sparsely populated and has all of these geographic impediments, what you end up finding is that they're having a little bit more time. They're a little bit more slow on the uptick. And then to add to that, the Mongol invasions start to happen, right? So we're talking Genghis Khan. We're talking like that Mongol invasion that took over all of Asia and all of China and eventually in many ways made its way deep into India and set up a lot of what we even see today as the modern world, and opened up the trade between Europe and Asia that would eventually lead to the bubonic plague that we talked about. That led all the way up to this area of the Carpathian Mountains and of Romania. So we're talking Genghis Khan and the Mongols are sweeping into this area. And what happens was the worst things that we hear about the Mongol invasion all basically get tested out on this specific area of Moldavia, Wallachia, Transylvania, right? And what we see is that a lot of what happens with the Mongol invasions gets thrown into this kind of small space, right? So a few things about that. Tribes get displaced from Iran and from the Middle East into these areas of Hungary. So already you have sort of a place that's trying to find its identity, and you add this kind of like hyper exotic grouping, right? And that eventually gets folded in, and you start to see, all of these different parts of the East mixing with these things from the West, and they're in turmoil, right? And then what happens is you get the Mongols, right? And the Mongols they're not out of breath yet. They're not like, okay, we've gone far enough. It's kind of cold out here. We're done, right? And so they're still doing what the Mongols are doing. And so some of the cities from the Mongol Empire, what we know about like how Genghis Khan, thought was that same psychological fear that Attila the Hun used was super good for the Mongols. And so Genghis Khan made a point of being extra savage and extra I don't want to use the word savage, but extra violent, right? And so he would kill off an entire city so that when he came to the gates of the next city, the city would be just like, we're good, we give up, please don't kill all of us, right? And it's known that the Mongol invasion took and actually succeeded to a certain amount in this area. And in 1241, for example, Wallachia, the entire Hungarian army and the king were killed in this area of Wallachia. I mentioned our entire military wiped out, and our leader wiped out, just all of them, every single one of them wiped out in West Virginia, right? And you can imagine sort of the psychological effect of that kind of violence in that area. And kings in succession then in this area, basically they're just like, the Mongols retreated, and I think my guess is that they retreated because of the bubonic plague, right? The Mongols retreated from this place, and what's interesting, and we'll get into this a little bit further, but what we discussed about germ warfare and lobbing of infected bodies over the walls, this was tried out in this area as well, right? So what ends up happening is they pull back, and the kings of this area of Wallachia, of Transylvania, they're just like, we can never have that happen again. We need to be ready, right? And one of the things that the Mongols, one of the things in those days that you did in order to prepare for attacks, and basically it was the way people got ready for attacks all the way to the Maginot Line in France, was you built forts and you built fortifications. So the kings of this area of Romania, or at that point in time, it was Hungary, right? Because it went back and forth. They built a ton of castles in this area to protect the space. But what happened was, you spend a lot of money making castles, and you don't have a lot of money for yourself. If you don't have a lot of money for yourself, you don't have a lot of money to bring in people that are learning all sorts of interesting scientific facts during the Renaissance. You don't have a lot of art. You don't have a lot of the trappings, because you're busy defending yourself and building these stone fortifications in case the Mongols attack again. And into this area, right, 1242, we have the plague that leads us into into the mid to late 1350s. You're recovering from the plague. And into all of this, you have the Ottoman Empire, right? And you see that directly underneath Wallachia. And the Ottoman Empire is starting to pump up, right? And they're starting to declare jihad. And they're starting to say, we can expand under religious fervor. And you have the fights between Christendom and Islam. And those start up just as these folks are getting over the bubonic plague. And what happens is, in Ottomans attack in this area start in 1421. And Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tepes, comes into this place with a history of violence and death and germs and warfare and what is in our world known as extreme barbarities and extreme like extreme violence. And he comes into this, and he's born in 1428. Now you're thinking here, he's born 1428. 1421 is when the Ottomans start attacking Europe and this area in particular. And Vlad is born into violent religious wars in an area that has seen extreme violence, has not seen the benefits of peace and prosperity in the same ways that has been experienced by the stability of Western Europe. And then we have like all of this stuff. So yeah, so it's kind of a pretty amazing like thing to be walking into, and I just kind of wanted to make sure that we had that we touched base on all of these like early things, so that we had like a context as we get into the fun stuff, right? Or the fun stuff. So yeah, so I guess any reactions? I know I kind of went off there for a moment, but
Well, yeah, but you were on a specific direction, and I didn't want to interrupt it because I was like, where are we gonna go? It is important, I think, to mention that Vlad grew up besieged by war. Um, According to sources here online, he was taken hostage with his brother and father by Ottoman warlords and held prisoner for 5 years as a boy.
right. And so like
You're gonna grow up mean.
yeah, well, let's think about that. The idea of hostages, like political hostages, is pretty common in this time, right? Like, any of you guys, did you guys watch Game of Thrones?
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
So Theon Greyjoy was a political hostage of the wolf people. What are their names? The
Arcs.
yeah, the Starks, right? And so that think of Vlad as Theon Greyjoy in the house of the Ottoman Empire, and also think that there's a high likelihood that his life in as a hostage, as a noble hostage, was relatively okay by the comparisons of what like life was like back home, right? So a few things. He was hostage because the Ottomans wanted passive participation of these areas that were basically under control by the Ottomans, right? So Vlad's dad, in a way, was kind of forced into cooperating with the Ottomans.
Yeah.
And so Vlad and his siblings, right? Amanda?
Well, his brother. He had a brother.
Yeah. So Vlad and his brother were sort of held there. And you can imagine then, if you're separated from your family against your will, you're going to hold some animosity towards people, right?
Yeah.
And so you can kind of see where he would be building some animosity towards these folks. And I think later on in his life, while he's in captivity, his dad, being seen as someone who was like in cahoots with the Ottomans, gets killed by Wallachian nobles, right? So he gets deposed, and then he gets killed. So Vlad is kind of like he basically finds out that his family has been murdered while he's in I assume Constantinople. No, not yet. So he's with the Ottomans. And it's funny, right? I even just made the mistake. The fall of Constantinople didn't happen until 1457, right? So the Turks still weren't in Constantinople. But during his lifetime, during Vlad's lifetime, that happened, right? And the Turks were the overwhelming menace of his entire life, right? So you can see that he was indirect captivity from them. From that, he was he resents them. It was because of them and what they did to his dad that his dad and his brother were killed, right? So at this point, he goes back home and he's a man on a mission, right? And so basically, this is where Vlad begins his rise to power. So I want to just kind of pause for a second and talk a little bit about the name Dracula and Dracul, right? And where that comes from. Do either of you have that offhand?
Well, it's dragon.
Right. Yeah.
Son of the dragon.
Yes, exactly. Dracula means son of the dragons.
Yeah.
So like adding an A to like the name is like it's the equivalent of Mac in Scottish. In Scottish it's Maclean, son of Lean, right? And Ovich in Russian, right? So right. Pavlovich is son of Pavel, right? And so or adding like a little bit to the end of it. I'm sure in the original Romanian it's far more terrifying, but Dracula meant son of the dragon, right? And in fact, Vlad II, for all practical purposes, wasn't much of a dragon, but he was part of the Order of the Dragon, right? So I think the best way of kind of figuring like making sense of Dracula as a title is like is as if like think of it as a hereditary title, like Dracul being Lord, and so Vlad was known as son of the Lord, and the Order of the Dragon being a very special order, and that was given to his dad, right? And so Draculea, I think, is Lea is the Romanian the Romanian thing that you add to make it. I'm sure there's a specific name to make it son of, right?
Yeah.
And so the name Dracula and was part of Vlad's the name, but really he went by Vlad III, Vlad Tepes, or Tepes. I think I've heard it named Tepes before, and then of course Vlad the Impaler. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about like how he got the nickname Vlad the Impaler.
That sounds like history. Dan, are you ready for this?
Dan, you wanna kind of
Yeah, I've been silent for like an hour. But
you have been.
Well, I think we all know where he got the name.
Yeah, so talk to us about like impaling and like what's the deal there?
Well, as I know it, I've never done it, but I hear it goes up the butt, and it gets a little weird.
Yeah.
And out the mouth,
and then out your mouth, and then you're pegged to the ground.
That's what I mean. I can't make it better.
No.
Like try to make it all. Well, it's all nice. No, it's gross. It's weird.
It is gross. It is gross. And I do want to. I want to take this opportunity to show a couple of.
Show them
I've been so silent for like the last hour.
But you're immediately ready to
chime in on
anal penetration, and Dan is on it.
So,
basically,
one of the books that I had about his life said that he became so obsessed with learning the interior workings of our biology so that he could insert the pike from the bottom there, and he could move around all the major organs so that you would still be alive when it came out your throat.
Oh, shut up. Are you serious?
I'm not joking. I'm not joking about that. That he practiced moving the pike in just a specific way so that he wouldn't puncture your bowels, he wouldn't puncture your lung.
Come on.
I mean to tell you.
Seriously, I have another bottle of wine I have to go through tonight. Jesus Christ.
I think the way that we portray this tiny culture in these mountains, hiding in the dark, trying to keep people from sacking their cities, you had to create a trauma bubble around your.
Yeah.
You had to create.
No, she's right.
A psychic defense, because at some point the Ottomans people were starting to poke around here and said, "Oh my God, there's people on pikes. We're just going to turn around and go home. This is no place for us."
That's exactly.
One before you start fighting.
That is exactly right. And the trauma bubble as a kind of defense, as a form of defense, it's what we were talking about with the folks with Attila the Hun and with Genghis Khan, right? And crucifixion from the Romans, and you go on and on and on, right? And we see that psychological warfare and being able to like really like get in the weeds and really like freak people out was an effective tool. So you've got these castles, and I think that there's a story of in one of these skirmishes that go back and forth with Vlad the Impaler, that that he took a bunch of prisoners, and then as the majority of the Ottoman Empire started approaching this place, they found all of the people who had been taken prisoner. They found them impaled, and they were just like, and you can imagine, right? Like what does that look like, and what kind of, like, how does that affect your mentality as you're going into battle? Is this stretch of dark wooded mountains, worth it? I mean, if you get control of the gold and salt, do you really need to continue picking this fight? And also, how much gold and salt is worth it if you can find other sources? When you've got this guy, and here's this picture of Vlad, and I think let's take so yeah, Amanda, you're totally right about the trauma bubble, and I think that's a really good way of putting it. It is a form of defense. I did not know about these stories about and I think there are a lot of stories about the savagery, about the how the brutality with which he went off on folks. And there's a story about him putting a gold cup on top of a fountain, and that he's like, I'm going to adorn the top of this fountain with a gold cup in the middle of town, and that nobody would dare steal it.
Yeah.
There
you go.
Because they knew that if you stole it and they found you, you'd get a stick up your butt.
You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
Exactly. And so let's with that in mind, let's look at this incredible picture of Vlad, right? Like, this is the most famous image of him. And it's the most famous portrayal of him. I don't know, and I'm not entirely sure how accurate this is, or how old this is, or even anything about the painter. I should have done a little bit of research around it, but I think there's a few things for us to note about his manner of dress, right? Like, we are talking here, the time that he was alive was 1428 to 1477. We're talking peak Renaissance here, and we're talking just a few decades later. Columbus would sail, and the whole conflict between Europe and the Americas would begin. And so when you think about this human as being a contemporary of Michelangelo and of the Renaissance. And you see a lot of the same things, but they are not the same things, right? So, Dan, what do you see with this guy? Like, what of his trappings are kind of like unique to his area and unique to that space between East and West?
Well, let's talk about that mustache.
Yeah, right.
The whole hair situation is very intense.
Think how cold it is, though. I'd have a freaking mustache if I lived there.
Well, that's a good point.
Freezing
You're
to
right.
death.
You're right.
Yeah, but I think the facial hair as an identifier of certain tribes is it's important in these areas, because you got to remember.
Well, that's a very manly mustache, right? Like, it's huge. It goes out to the cheeks and up, and I couldn't grow it. I grow a good beard.
Yeah.
Damn it.
So yeah, and facial hair is as a tribal identity of not Roman, right? Like
right. No, and the crown that he's wearing, it's very.
Yeah. Count how many points are on that star on his forehead.
Right.
8?
There's 8.
Yeah.
That's known as the Chaos Star.
Really?
Yeah. That's considered esoteric or occult knowledge. That 7
No,
star
really?
means it's in line with Judeo-Christian. 8 means you're 1 extra. So 8 is like, if you take 2 squares and then turn them slightly, you'll have an 8-pointed star with 2 squares. So it's like an image of duality and domination. It's definitely a dominant 8 means you cannot be touched.
And it also
Oh.
speaks of the duality of the space that he inhabits, the space between east and west.
Yes, there you go. I think that has a lot to do with it, Alf. Honestly.
Yeah. And you do look at that headdress and those little feathers that are sticking up, and those don't look like cockerel feathers or peacock feathers, or the feathers of like or the adornments of like the Middle Ages and Renaissance, right? That we think like these are more like brushes. These are more. I mean, it does remind me of like the headdress that you would wear on it reminds me more of an Eastern headdress than it does a European one. I mean, the velvet to me speaks of European, and so does the velvet like jacket, and even the fur lining makes it like, oh, this is cold, and fur is used as a sign of the strong nature man all the time. And I think his wild hair and his mustache and the fur all speak to I'm a forest person, right?
Yeah.
And the headpiece speaks to I am of the East as much as I am of the West. And so what you see here is someone who really wanted to represent an intensity and a like, this is someone who knows who they are and is making a statement through dress and through this painting. And I think that's really important. So back to the crazy stuff that he did, right? Like we're talking about impalement. And I think that impaling was kind of the thing that he did. But I want to say that there are other stories about him nailing things to people's heads, like stuff. Is there something else out there?
Oh, I've not.
I only know
that.
the impalement, which is enough for me.
I mean, I'm sure he's very much dabbled in all things. Who could stop him? But he chose impaling as his statement piece. But I've not run into any information so far that said he dabbled in anything else, but that he tortured people for sure.
Right.
Well, Lord knows what happened when he tortured people. You can get creative and let your mind run with it.
I've got a good one. I've got a good atrocity. Now, so a lot of this. So Vlad had skirmishes with the Saxons as well.
Ugh.
Yeah, and these are the folks who would later make Germany, right? And I think it's worth noting then that a lot of the stories that we get about Vlad, that aren't from it's similar to what we talk about the Dacians and Attila the Hun and how they're seen through the Roman eyes, right? So from what I understand, Vlad was an effective warlord. He protected folks from the Turks. From the Ottomans, he protected folks from the Saxons, and the Saxons were particularly mad at him. And so a lot of these wood carvings that we have that I'm showing here of Vlad are all of these come from Saxon chronicles, right? And so you also see what I find interesting is there's only one guy who seems to have it up the butt on this one. But there are a lot of people that are chopped up. He's eating near them in this wood carving, right? So it denotes that. So this is from a Saxon.
Well, that makes him so scary if it's eating next to the.
Thank you. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah.
Here we're back to cannibalism.
We are
right. Eating them. He's not eating them, but he's implying that he doesn't care and he can still have an appetite while that's happening. You've got to be special to do that.
Right. And this idea that the people from this dark area ingest other people, you will see that repeated. And there are stories of other royals in this area who drank the blood of virgins and swam in blood. And,
who was the
was it Catherine?
The missus that did it?
The what?
Was it Catherine?
The missus. There was a lordess.
Yeah,
a duchess. She took the baths in the
blood of the local virgins, and then eventually she was locked up, right? And all of these stories hail from
Elizabeth Bathory.
There you go.
Bathory.
And who was she?
Horses. Countess Elizabeth Bathory bathed in blood of virgins.
And where
Well,
was
who
she?
wouldn't?
Who
It's so nice
Uh,
on the skin.
Wow.
Where was she from?
Zoning it in here. Oh wow. Hungary.
There you go.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
There you
So-
go.
So all of these stories of these folks that are particularly bloody come from this area, and Vlad just happens to be one of them, right? So let me give you this other atrocity from a Saxon chronicle. Vlad had a big copper cauldron built and put a lid made of wood with holes on the top.
Oh.
He put people in the cauldron and put their heads in the holes and fastened them there. Then he filled it with water and set a fire under it and let the people cry their eyes out until they were boiled to death.
Ah.
Huh.
Ah.
Right. So some more things. He ordered that women be impaled together with their suckling babies on the same stake.
What? Why?
The babies fought for their lives, at their mother's breasts until they died. Then they had the women's breasts cut off and put the babies inside head first. Thus, he then impaled them together.
What's wrong with these
What?
people?
I mean, come on.
So the question here is, and these are horrible things, right? But I mean, I think about in Shakespeare's Henry V. There's a line during a siege where he's describing to the person inside the siege what will happen if his soldiers are allowed to rampage inside. And he says, if not, look, why in a moment to see your fathers taken by their silver beards and their most reverend heads dashed to the walls. Your naked infants spitted upon pikes, while their mothers with their howls confused do break the clouds. Right? And this is Shakespeare. And this is an English king talking about naked infants spitted upon pikes.
Right. No, but Shakespeare, like 300 years after this,
not 300
still
years
talking
after
about this.
Not 300 years, 2 or 1 even, right? Like it's not.
Okay. I'll give it to you. Right. Ugh.
So this idea that of putting babies on spikes and all of that, yes, it had its sources somewhere, but it's not that uncommon in the Middle Ages for people to talk about this. In the Middle Ages and the Renaissance to be talking about these things happening. And I don't want to make it seem like I'm a Vlad the Impaler or any of these freak show sadists, right? Who knows what pains and what horrors all of Vlad endured during this period in time. But I think there's much to be said about the area from which he came from and the necessity for these violent myths, right, to be created around them, and how like all of it kind of devolved into what we know as the vampire myths and why Transylvania and this area are so important. And I don't feel like we should dwell too much on like all of the potential horrors of Vlad. I do want to point out that despite all of these horrible things we do, and despite being maybe possibly the role model as Dracul of the blood-sucking sexy vampire Dracula, that in Romania and in the region of Wallachia that he was ruler of. Oh, and by the way, he was Voivode of Voivode. Yeah, Voivode was, and Voivode is actually a military title that's kind of somewhere between general and prince. So I think that's kind of interesting. So really, his whole persona and his whole existence was around warfare and around violence. But anyway, this area that he was king or prince of and prince around, he is known as a national hero. He's known as somebody who kept out the Turks. And he's known, he was known as being brutal, but not more or less brutal than the Bathory Countess that bathed in blood, or the Huns that rode with the severed heads of the people around them, and all of these kind of different things. And I think that that when the area is bathed in darkness, that historic trauma goes to their roots and it speaks to them. Right. And I know that I always bring this back to Mexico, but I think about the resonance of goth culture as we see it today in Mexico, and that sort of angst and pain. And it's funny to me watching how that resonates and how that darkness speaks to Mexicans today, and how it actually has its origins in Aztec culture and in the tragedy and violence and loss of the conquest. And what I see in the people of Eastern Europe and the Carpathians and Transylvania is something similar, and that is a historical trauma that made them bloody. I've always said that the history of Mexico is the bloody, vicious, horrifying Aztecs against the bloody, vicious, horrifying Spaniards. And when you have that, you have a people who just yearn for kindness and stability, but have these dark powers and these dark traumas that consistently engage themselves in the culture. So here's a statue to Vlad the Impaler.
Very brutalist. I appreciate the minimalism of it.
Yeah, but it's and I think this is all. I venture to say this is a Soviet era statue. I don't know whether that's true, but it could be a Soviet era.
You think
statue.
so?
Yeah, I do, because it speaks to national heroes, and the Soviets wanted to.
It's very Soviet.
Yeah, it is, and that little stand and the style is very Soviet.
It's very pretty. It's good. It gets to the point.
So anyway, that's kind of my take on it, and we're fast approaching here. We're half the 90-minute mark, so I wanted to give you guys a chance to chime in on any other observations that you have on Vlad and all of this.
Well,
Dan, I give the floor to you for this.
Thank you. And I've been very quiet because I don't know much about this region at all. But I'm very excited about talking about Mexico and the southwestern United States. I think, and sort of, we'll get into it. And this culture of warfare and
what it does,
getting nuts,
and how they have to carry it to this day, right? I'm
right.
I think about the historic traumas that happen here, and that happened in Eastern Europe and in these countries that bordered the Mongol Empire and bordered the Ottoman Empire. And I think about the violence that those societies showed to each other, right? And I think about stories of the Russian mafia and Eastern European mafias and shooting people in the face and sort of steps that are taken that we would consider like over the top even by the standards of violent criminals, right? And how much of that is rooted in the violence that formed these nations and these cultures. And I'm not saying that it's, like I said, I'm not an apologist for any of these traumas and these and the reaction. There is a way to break the cycle, but understanding that there is a cycle can help us understand the cultures and the countries and the psyches of a lot of these people as we continue in history. And by all means, Romania is not a shit starter in the world, and hasn't been for a long time, right? No. And they're not nearly as problematic as people who had their shit together, like Germany will be, and England will be, and Spain will be, right? And so I think it's important for us to note where when we equate these areas to some creepy stuff and some dark, creepy stuff, where that comes from and what our part is in propagating that mythology and in continuing these dark tales and these dark psychologies of these places. So, be a little bit kinder to Transylvania and be a little bit kinder to Romania, despite the fact that they're the way they spell things.
They're doing the best they can, man.
Yeah, I know, man. It's
the dice sucked for them.
Yeah,
when you rolled the dice, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So
sorry for the F word.
So, with that,
can I throw in my last two?
Go throw in.
I was lucky enough to live in Whitby, North Yorkshire, in 1997. After Alf gave me a respite in Jersey City. I lived in Whitby, North Yorkshire for about a year, and I learned living there that Bram Stoker had lived in the abbey or next to the abbey when he was writing his novel Dracula.
Carfax, yeah.
And while he was holed up in his hotel writing away at this novel, he heard the town crying out. So he was like, oh, there's some news. I better go see what's what. And he goes down to the beach, and there's a giant ship crashed against the shore. But it's not crashed in bits. It's all intact. It just rolled itself right up to the beach. Right. No one jumped off the boat. So people were hollering and trying to get someone's attention. And where's the captain? Where's the... No sailors on board. He used that as the introduction for Dracula's arrival in England, because we're definitely grossed out by the impaling, and I hated these details about mothers and babies. But you know what's scarier than the visual proof of violence is the absence of proof.
Ah,
yeah.
There you go.
He's right,
and that's spot on for this area that you can't quite reach. And all we know about it comes from these frightened Saxons and these Turks who stepped back, right?
Yeah.
And said, "Oh my God,"
right.
And then you romanticize it. You add a lot of the folklore that comes from that area, right? So I mean, there are terrifying tales of creatures and monsters and blood-sucking creatures that are all over the world, right? But it resonated in Europe and in England in that time from this place that is relatively geographically close to them, but still dark and unknown. And you could posit that these things and these monsters and these ghouls could come from that area. That's where the Dracula myth comes from, and that's why to this day we talk about Vlad Tepes and Vlad III and Vlad Dracul, who in the grand scope of thing, I dare say, is a minor historical figure in the grand scheme of things. But we talk about him because Bram Stoker's romanticizing of this area made him larger than life and fed into our interest into the narrative of this kind of scary place.
But he made it sensual.
Right.
Yeah.
He described Lord Byron physically as Dracula's countenance. He said, you know who the ladies love? The ladies love that crazy ass Lord Byron. So he made him tall, dark, and handsome. And that's why we have a more sensual connection now with visual vampires. It's very ooh la la. But the true belief in Hungary and Romania and this environment is the undead are frightening, and they're literally corpses with worms in them coming to eat you. They're not sexy. You do not want to go to bed with them. That's why they invented tombstones, so that these stupid things can't sit up in the earth after you bury them. You put a tombstone on their head on the ground so that they can't get up and rise and walk.
Interesting. And I want to say that there every so often we get vampire stories from this area, and they're like, oh my gosh, this they found a body buried at a crossroads with a severed head and with a stake through its heart, right?
Yeah.
Every so often you hear these stories, and I'm always questioning their veracity because it's always from a small town that could use a couple of extra shekels from tourism, right?
Yeah.
And they sometimes they'll find these vampire hunting kits, right? They've made a cottage industry from this, but all of it does have its place in folklore, and I think it's just it's just an amazing area, and I do hope to visit it someday. And also, you know, like we didn't even get into this connection of East and West, and the Gypsy, the Roma culture in this area. I did not say the G word. The Roma culture of this area. And what that was like. And my apologies to anybody who's watching this in Europe. In the US, we have the notions of Roma culture are still a little bit more on the abstract, very similar to how people in Europe treat Native Americans. You guys think of Native Americans as abstract things. And so it's difficult to humanize them sometimes from a cultural standpoint. For us, the Roma are a very similar thing. It's just not a thing that we're accustomed to, and so sometimes we fall back to culturally insensitive ways of referring to things. And I just wanted to take that moment to apologize for that. So all that being said, I think this was a great episode, you guys.
Fun, very fun.
Yeah. So do you guys have?
It has been fun. It's been. I've learned a lot on this episode. Yeah, the whole mountain. I kind of want to revisit the mountain thing in a later episode, which I think could be a fun thing, because the Carpathians for this episode, all three of us are from the Front Range of Colorado.
That's right.
Mountains. Like, there's something about like a wall of rock. Right?
Gallagher did a joke about that.
It gets into your head, right?
What was the joke?
Oh, Gallagher said
like
that
it does. Like
the
even
people who settled Colorado were tough enough to make it all the way to this wall of rock, and they looked up and said, "You know what? Let's build the Coliseum here."
Yeah.
Right?
That's
like,
Gallagher's joke.
Yeah.
No, and like right, it's the joke that every Colorado and Wyoming house has a broken wagon wheel in front of it.
Yes,
Yep.
that's
why
also
do it?
his joke, and I hate to say it, it's kind of true where I'm from.
Yeah. Oh God. Let's be honest.
You guys have any show and tell?
LaSalle and Greeley are beautiful towns. Love them, miss them, hate them, love them.
Mixed emotion.
Do you guys have
people though?
Do you guys have any show and tell?
Oh, I don't. Well, I do have a slight show and tell. I thought it was funny today. I was looking something up. I was looking up Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill has a great granddaughter whose name is Arizona Jane.
Good Lord.
I'm not kidding you. Her name is Arizona Jane, and she was born in Texas, and she was born in 2016. And I thought that's my show and tell.
That's a good show and tell, Dan.
Arizona Jane
Churchill.
Yep. No, well, Arizona
No.
Jane
I'm sure
Arizona
Jane
is her
like
name.
like Hinkenlooper, right? Like it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, but of course Churchill would have a great granddaughter named Arizona Jane. Got it. So that's my show and tell. It's not great, but it is.
No, that's fine, Dan. That's fine. That's a good show and tell.
Because
Don't
I
beat
was dumb
yourself
enough
up.
to give
Not
away
every
all
day's
my
a
real
winner.
vampire books, I'm left with a donation from our friend Mike Black called Mondo Macabro, Weird and Wonderful Cinema Around the World. I happened to flip right open to all of the Spanish and Mexican vampire movie poster part. Wow. They went the extra mile on these wow. I mean, the Baron of Terror.
Hang on just a second. I'm going to find this. Tell us a little bit more about
Ladrón de Calaveras. I mean, let's have it. La Momia Azteca. Let's have it. The cha-cha-cha. Yeah. There's a lot of sensuality in the world of vampires. The modern vampire. Mondo Macabro is this book. Dracula in Istanbul got its own chapter.
Nice. That's awesome. And yeah, right. Like that's again, Dracula in Istanbul having its own chapter is super like that speaks to how we know in our heart of hearts that Dracula inhabits a world between ours, between heaven, between hell and earth, between east and west, between the mountains and the city, right? And that's
if you're interested, Dan, you want to know about this east-west thing, just look into the 8-pointed star. The 8-pointed star is the connection of both.
8-pointed star. All right.
Okay, so speaking of these connections between East and West, my show and tell is actually it's actually the Bulgarian Orthodox Church.
Oh yeah.
Right. So I think nothing really illustrates just how in between worlds our subject matter today spoke than the notion of Eastern Orthodoxy and specifically the Bulgarian Orthodox Church. So Bulgarian Orthodox monks have, and the Bulgarian Orthodox Church has something what is known, and I'm going to mispronounce it, but I believe it's schema or schema monks. And this is when you reach a certain level of enlightenment in your monctitude, in your monkdom, in your searches inward, that you are given garments with illuminated manuscripts, illuminated symbols on them.
Wow.
That show that you possess an insight into spirituality that is beyond the everyday. And that is not something that the Catholic Church does. And while the Eastern Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox, and Greek Orthodox churches do some of it, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church goes above and beyond on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this little slideshow, and we're going to watch these robed monks go by, and some of these nuns go by, and it's to the music. The name of the song is called Megaloskemos, which I believe would be the plural for very schemos, right? And and the name of this these monks are the schema monks or the schema monks, right? And so we can assume that the name of this song is like super enlightened, right? Megaloskemos. And so let's just so this is a real song. Like, this is something that
you very pretty. I like it.
And if you listen to the music, it is a lot more somber and a lot more intense than what you might hear, and a lot darker even than what you might hear.
Hold on, I see the pictures over here.
Oh yeah, the pictures.
I can see the picture.
Yeah.
The bears and the crosses and the whole getup.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you look at the symbolism here, and Brass, I'm sure you'll have a really good time with this. Look at that. Let's just pause on this real quick. But you look at these symbols and so much early Christianity, right? And so much of that the Cyrillic alphabet and the doves and all of these different symbols, right? Like the spear on the left is not the same as whatever that thing is on the right of this cross. And this is just full of mysticism and full of symbolism that is very foreign to Western Europeans. And also, think of the darkness, you guys. Like, it is definitely of the other.
The music's great. It's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that's my show and tell.
Wow.
Yeah.
I like
just the whole church. The whole church is your show.
Yeah, but specifically just think about how that church is set up and what mysticism looks like for them versus what we see as mysticism in the West. And you think about like the whirling dervishes of Istanbul, right? And that culture.
Sufism.
Yes, Sufism, exactly. And those traditions, and those seem a little bit closer to this than what we see in the priests or preachers of the West nowadays, right? And the button-up collars of like the clergy in Anglican churches and so on. So anyway, that was mine. Brass, anything to add on the Bulgarian Orthodox Church?
Oh God! I mean, there is a lot going on here. Things of which of course, I wouldn't be aware of, but the symbology is out there for anybody who who follows the esoteric. So first of all, I want to address their bib. There's kind of an apron that they're wearing.
Yeah.
That is traditional with most secret societies, that they cover the man's front piece so as to say that there is a separation of keeping your energy inside you and you're not sending any sexual energy out. You're
No.
keeping all of that important energy, that life force is kept within you. So that apron is to show you they're not going to share it.
Well, I'll
Even no
I'll
matter how
describe
bad
that
you
to
want
my
it.
wife.
That's not here for you to share. No, yeah.
Ugh.
Wow, yeah. I'll just
Awesome.
leave it right there. There is
And
a
I like
lot
those beards
here.
though.
And
Those
don't you
beards
live
are
near one of
amazing.
these?
Huh?
Don't you live near one of these?
Yeah, I stumbled upon that right before we went to air. There is a Bulgarian Orthodox church in Silver Lake. I'm about to
No.
take a walk, dude. I'm about to go walk to find that because it's right next to a really good coffee shop. But, yeah, that's interesting. They're really out here doing it.
Right. And that is, and at some point, you know, like all of these different things became culture, became religion, and they made their way to Silver Lake, and they're still with us today. And in a very real, tangible way, that darkness and that trauma and that inhabiting dark spaces and strange and east-west space made its way to Silver Lake. And I don't think there's any better way than to see the whole thing out than that way. So thank you guys so much.
It is cool.
An amazing,
I mean,
amazing day today. I think we really nailed it today. And yeah, let's see this out.
Yeah.
Bye guys.
I like it. Where are we going next?
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Bye, guys.
Bye all.